What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin coming to you from the Big Blue Nation once again. And today I was going to talk to you about the jade plant. Crassula ovata is the scientific name for it. Some of you have probably known it as the lucky plant, the money plant, the money tree, and it's really all the names I know for the common names of it. And as you know, earlier in my career, I did a video on an actual money tree. So this one has been called a money tree before, so that's why I wanted to go ahead and throw that out there and let you all know that other people may be calling this one a money tree or a money plant, but it's most commonly known as a jade plant. It is a succulent. It's native to the kind of warm, hotter areas like around southern Africa, Mozambique. But nowadays you can find this plant all over the world in tropical, kind of warmer, hotter climates. They do just fine, though it is mildly toxic to humans and to pets as well. I know it is toxic to cats, dogs, and horses. So I wouldn't plant this anywhere that they could get into it. Now there are a little bit of oils on it and some of the sap that can come out. Some people can touch it and it'll itch and burn them. But if it's ingested, it can cause you to start vomiting. And like I said, it is a mild toxic. It's not going to actually kill you unless you actually eat a whole bunch of it. But before you could do that, the depression and the vomiting and the diarrhea would set in. So hopefully you would know to stop. But it is a great plant to have. I believe it did make NASA's clean air plants list back in the 70s, I believe it was. So this is a great plant to help kind of clean and sterilize your air and help you out as well while you kind of help it out. Great symbiotic relationship. Plus they're beautiful. I mean, look at this. My really large one, it looks like a bonsai tree, actually. And that's really what happens with these trees, and that's why they're so popular. They're not a tree, but they do resemble a tree. They get, as they get older, they'll grow out and get kind of lanky and have kind of the brown stems around it. And then it has really pretty, depending on your light, or kind of light green leaves. But it is gorgeous. I love this plant. I've had this guy for about 5 or 6 years. They're not really fast growers, but they do grow a little fast. And they're native to those areas that I was telling you about earlier. So they do like kind of warm, hot, tropical areas, but they're not as drought tolerant as other succulents might be. So you need to remember to kind of water these guys because they will get really thirsty and their roots will die back. And then the plant will die back too. So they don't need to go really long without water because they're not very drought tolerant at all. I think during the summertime and spring, I water this guy at least once a week, if not more, depending on how the soil looks and how hot it is outside. Now with sunlight, you could probably put these plants out in direct sun if they're pretty well established. Now this guy, my tallest one here, I usually keep him out back on my patio/catio where the cat hangs out. It's never had a problem with it. My cat's never gone up and kind of like snipped it or anything. Though I do have other plants in front of it and he doesn't really jump up there a whole lot. But you do need to be careful, especially if you do have young kids around because that could hurt them as well. But if you do, just kind of keep it in a high area. Maybe a tall windowsill that they can't reach up to. But that's just really your discretion. This guy, the tall one, you can kind of tell he is getting a little lanky and needs a little bit more light. So today I'm going to show you how to repot one of them. I've got my medium-sized jade right here. And then I've got the golem fingers over here down in front. They're really unique, but it's a jade plant too, and I think those are really cool. There is one called ET fingers that does look a little bit different than this one, but they're kind of similar. But this one right here is probably one of my favorites just because I like the little red outline on the leaves that it gets from the sun. It'll have kind of a red tint around the leaves. My larger one does not right now, and I don't remember if he actually ever does get red tips. I don't think so. But I will go ahead and take my pruning shears that have been sanitized, of course, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut off some of these kind of sicklier looking leaves or leaves and stems that kind of get in the way of it actually looking like a tree. I don't know if you can see this back here, but I've got a really big stem that's kind of fallen off. That doesn't look that good. So I'm just going to go ahead and start nicking stuff and trying to take away from the leaves that do not make it look like it's an actual tree. And this is very good for your plant, not just the pruning in general, but just the kind of care that you're giving your plant when you prune it back and look over it and everything. That way you can tell if it's getting infested with any kind of bugs. I don't see any kind of bite marks. I do see a little bit of crispy leaves here, so I will take off anything that kind of takes away from the aesthetics of my beautiful plant. Been about 2 or 3 years since I've trimmed him, and surprisingly he looks really good. Now for the most part you can tell the leaves are kind of holding on pretty well. That means that my tree is getting enough water and enough sunlight. If not, you will touch these leaves and they'll just start to drop everywhere all of a sudden. And all that means is, usually it means that your plant's not getting enough water. It's either too dry or maybe it's getting too much water. You got to remember they are kind of from the tropical areas where it is really warm, so they do like some water, but they don't like a whole lot. And never ever ever keep a pot underneath these guys. Now I've got them in terracotta pots. This one's just a regular little terracotta pot, and it's got the saucer attached to the bottom, so I couldn't take that off. But whenever I water him, I always tip him over to make sure that there's not a lot sitting down in the saucer, because if there is a saucer attached, the water's not going to be able to get away freely, and it's always going to keep some water up there bunched in with the roots. And like I said, they don't like to be soggy and saturated because they will start dropping a whole lot of leaves and it could kill your plant. Alright, so far so good. It does look kind of bushy, kind of how I really want him to look. Very beautiful tree. And it's not even a tree, it's a succulent. But that's why I have him on the Lazy Susan, so I can kind of rotate him around and look at it from all angles to make sure I am satisfied with the aesthetics of it and remove anything that I'm not satisfied with. And make sure you do throw these in the trash and don't just throw them out in your yard, because any animals, cats, dogs, horses, or anything that come up to it may get into it and eat it and actually get it sick. Alright, well, as of now, I'm thoroughly satisfied with the way it looks, except I'm gonna get this little piece over here. So this has taken probably about 6 or 7 years, probably a little bit longer, because I got it from a store and it was about half this size. So I'm gonna say maybe close to 10 years old, maybe a little bit shorter than that. They do grow kind of fast and they do get really thick, but it's nothing that would actually kind of put on this much mass in just a couple of years. But this is a very valuable plant and I love it. I've had it for a long time. And just like anything else, with the substrate, I have it with the cacti and succulent Fox Farm mix. I believe it might have been Miracle Grow, but I do have the Nat Nix on top of it to make sure that the substrate isn't too saturated and it won't attract mealybugs or aphids or anything like that. Those kind of pests do run rampant on it. I know scale will have a field day with it, and not only scale, but spider mites can run rampant on these guys too. You'll kind of just look through with a different light source and make sure that you can't see any silk like filaments in between the leaves, because that might be indicative of spider mites. And like I say, it's one of the hardest pests to actually remove, but it's also one of the easiest at the same time. With the spider mites, you can take them out back and hose them off with a water hose, or just throw it in your bathtub and use your detachable shower head to kind of hose it off. Alcohol, I would put alcohol on a washcloth and kind of wipe it over on the thicker trunk parts, and you can make sure you rub on top and under every leaf. But as you can tell, there's a lot of leaves on this plant, so it would take a while to remove all that. So it's best to just kind of shower it all off. Scale is one that you would probably have to get some kind of chemicals in, and even then, I don't even know if you would be able to do that, just because scale will hunker down and attach itself to the stem, and then it's got a protective outside hard case. It's really hard to be penetrated, so I don't even know if the chemicals could do that. I would look up several ways to try to combat scale. If you ever do notice that you have a problem with that on here. Aphids, I would just go ahead and use ladybugs, because they can actually eat those up. Now, these guys can get anywhere from about 3 to 6 feet tall indoors. I think 3 feet is most common, but if all its nutritional information and everything's being taken well care of, it's watered like it's supposed to be, I'm sure it would get close to about 6 feet tall, if not all the 6 foot. And outdoors, they do get a little bit taller, but like I said, they're just great plants to have. And they're really unique. I mean, like I said, they've got a whole vast look to them. I mean, they're not always just in this form, but they've got leaves that are even kind of bigger and flatter and more like a paddle. And then they do have the ones that kind of do resemble like alien hands or phalanges or anything like that. But they're just really unique plants to have. Now, that being said, I'm going to go ahead and transplant my medium one. I wasn't paying attention and I kind of grabbed a pot bigger than I really wanted it to. Now, jade plants really do like to be root bound, and that will help them stay on the smaller side too. I've had him in this pot for over 2 years and he's done just fine. I probably won't transplant him until next year or maybe even the year after that, just depending on how he's looking come next spring. Now, I'll go ahead and add my substrate in here and make sure you have a drainage hole at the bottom, at least one really good one, because the water does need to have a place to go instead of being held in with the roots. And again, I'm using terracotta because it's so porous and it'll help whisk the water away, so that may help you as well. And also here in northern Kentucky, we do get storms a lot, and it does get pretty windy at times, so the terracotta will help my plants to kind of stay in place without actually being blown over into the neighbor's yard or anything like that. Now, if you choose to go ahead and mix your own substrate up, that's cool. I admire you for doing it, but I'm a little bit on the lazier side, so I will go ahead and get my Fox Farm or Miracle Grow already ready, because it does have a lot of sand in it, and that will help your plant not to hold on to so much water. It will actually allow it to kind of run through there. And as you can kind of tell, the roots are on the delicate side. They are really small and really thin, so be very easy whenever you're trying to separate out your roots and loosen up the root ball. And always do this over a trash can and make sure that you do not spill any on the floor in case your pet or child comes in afterwards. Please get help right away if you've noticed that they've gotten into something like this. Like I said, it is a mild irritant. It's a mild toxic, so it won't actually kill them, but no need to make them suffer. And then as I was saying, the roots are very, very, very small and very delicate too. So with all my other plants that I've transplanted, I always water them right afterwards just to make sure that there are no air bubbles left in there and that it starts off without being super thirsty and has adequate water and all. But I will wait a day or two before watering this plant to allow it plenty of time to kind of give the roots time to rest and recuperate before I water this guy. And that will help the roots out tremendously. So I would give it at least 1 to 3, maybe 4 days before you add water in here to let the roots kind of recover. Now, as I've said earlier, they do like water. I give mine at least water once a week, maybe even twice a week during the growth season, depending on how hot it gets. But they are sensitive to salts that can be found in water as well. Especially here in the tap in Kentucky, we have that limestone rich silty water, so I use distilled water because that will help remove any of the salts and any other kind of chemicals that may be in the water that may hurt your plant, any kind of chlorine or fluoride or anything. So be mindful of the kind of water you use too, because that can cause your leaves to kind of drop off, turn yellow, and just kind of all around look ugly. Now, as you're adding soil, just take your hands and kind of press down gently but firmly, and that will help kind of packed it all down so that there's not a lot of air bubbles in the way of the roots. And then again, not adding water right after will let the roots recover and then begin to search for water. Now, if you're watering your plant all the time, the roots really aren't going to kind of grow a whole lot because they have water being brought to them, and then they've got their substrate in here with plenty of food. So they wouldn't really kind of grow a whole lot. I mean, they would grow some, but not as if you're not watering it all the time so that it has plenty of time to kind of get out and look around for a water source. Now, another reason why the jade plants are so very popular is because they are extremely easy to propagate. So if you go to a greenhouse and you see any jade plants and the leaves have fallen off, you can maybe even pinch one off depending on if you talk to the gardener and they say that's okay. But if you just see one on the ground and it looks healthy, you can pick it up and take it home and set it in a warm, dry area and let it develop a callus over the scar where it's been attached to the stem. And you can actually grow a whole entire plant just from a single leaf cutting, although you can take it from a stem cutting as well. Now, if you do a stem cutting, I've always heard that it's best to get one that's about 2 to 3 inches long and has maybe about 2 pairs of leaves on top. And then I would stick it in an area where it's nice and warm and dry and let it build up its little callus over top of the scar for about 4 to 5 days, and go back and check on it periodically to see if the callus is actually calloused over. And then once it has calloused over, you can take some good cacti and succulent substrate and put it in a pot, lay your leaf cutting or your stem cutting on top of the soil and make sure the soil is actually moist. But don't saturate it and make it all soggy, and don't add water to it once the leaf or the stem cutting's been on there. But take a little spray bottle and moisten the substrate, and then take your leaf or cutting and then stick it on there once it's calloused over. And if you have a stem cutting and it's kind of top heavy or whatever, you feel free to use some rocks or sticks to kind of prop it up and let it stay there. And absolutely make sure that you cover it with soil on one end so that it knows to go ahead and start building up roots. Now, once that you've went ahead and set it on top of the substrate and you've added soil on there to kind of cover up half of the stem or the leaf cutting, I would let it sit there for about 5 to 7 days and then go back and kind of tap on it a little bit. And if it seems very solid and like it's not moving, then you're probably going to go ahead and start developing roots and having roots already developed on that cutting. So maybe kind of push on it or pull it just ever so slightly because the roots are very, very, very small. So it wouldn't take anything to really kind of pull the plant out even with the roots on it. But just use a little finger and just kind of touch it ever so gently. And if it seems pretty stationary, like it's not moving, it probably has developed roots. And then I would take another spray bottle and continue to spray it for about a minute just so that it gets adequate water in there because the roots have already developed. But you need to water it very gently because it wouldn't take much to wash those roots away and knock the leaf back over, and then you damage the roots. Now, that being said, these plants are not hardy with the cold at all. So if you have it sitting outside in the summertime all the time, make sure you bring it back in around the fall and the winter time for sure, because these plants will not survive temperatures that are lower than about 50 degrees, and I guess they may survive that, but they won't survive the frost and 32 degrees of freezing at all. So make sure you do not forget about them, and then you bring them back inside also. And that's one other reason why I do like these plants, is because they're extremely long-lived. It's not uncommon or unheard of to have a jade plant live in 70, 100 years or even longer than that. They are often passed down from generation to generation. So if you do have a leaf cutting or a stem cutting that you want to go ahead and grow a whole plant from, start it now and then tell your kids and grandkids about that, because they'll be so interested to see that one little bitty baby little tiny leaf can grow into this huge, ginormous, almost tree-like looking thing. So they're great plants to have, not only for that reason, but also because they will kind of take care of you and help purify the air also. And yes, they are evergreen species. They do not lose their leaves or pads during the fall or the winter time, though I have seen some of them actually fall off. And just like I did right there, I'm not wearing gloves. I've touched all over this plant and my nose was itching, so do not go back and scratch yourself around your eye or your nose or your mouth, because you will feel a burning sensation or an itching sensation, and it may make you sick. So after you've touched and handled all over this plant, make sure you wash your hands. So let me recap a couple things with these guys. If they're not established plants, if you've just got them from the store, do not set them in the sun, in direct sun, for a long time. I would start it out pretty easily. I would give it maybe about 20 to 30 minutes of direct sunlight a day, and then kind of scoot it back. And then next day I would probably do about 30 minutes to 45 minutes of sunlight, and just move it back a little bit then. And then for about a week I would gradually build up the amount of sunlight this plant gets, because you will notice that it will get some brown, kind of black areas and yellow areas that indicate that it has been scorched or sunburned, and then the leaves will fall off. There's no recovering from that. So you do not want to hurt your tree or succulent because the sun will damage this plant. But once it's been established and it's used to actually being in full sunlight, you're fine. They can receive well over 6 hours of direct sunlight a day, and they actually do like a lot of light. So if you do have one that you've just gotten from a store, build it up to that level and be patient and take it slow and be kind to your plant and do not hurt it. With water, they do like a good amount of water in the growing season from spring to summer, maybe even sometimes once a day in the morning if I know the temperatures are going to be well over 100 degrees also. Now in this in the fall and winter times, I usually water this guy about once, maybe twice a month in the non-growing season. So in the fall, I would probably just water it once a month, maybe twice if you feel like being pretty generous. And again, all you're going to do is just water it until water comes out the drainage hole at the bottom there. And then you've pretty much ensured that water has gone all the way down to the bottom and hit basically every root in there. Roots that don't get water every couple of days can die off. And again, these roots are very small and finicky, so be very careful not to miss them also. Temperatures, they really do like the same temperatures as we do, anywhere from 65 to 75, 80 degrees. And then once it gets into the low hundreds, that can be kind of a problem for these guys. So I would move them to where they're out of the hot midday sun if you can, but if they're used to it, it's fine. They should be fine, but I would water them at least in the morning or at night, because you do not want to leave a lot of water on the leaves. Water can act as a magnifying glass and kind of scorch the leaves for you in the hottest part of the day, so I usually water mine at night. That way they'll have adequate time to kind of dry out and make sure that they're not going to get burnt the next day. The substrate, I like to make sure that that is fast draining substrate, so make sure it does have a lot of sand in it. And if you're going to make your own, I would use builder's sand. Don't forget, they do like to be root bound, and that will help them kind of be on the smaller size. So don't repot your plant unless you notice that roots are kind of coming out through there, or that they're just really overgrown and that your leaves are falling off, but you've done everything else to make sure that they're fine, from watering them to feeding them to making sure you've changed the amount of sunlight, because if there is a sudden change in sunlight, the leaves will start dropping as well. Now with feeding, I would say I would feed mine about once a month as well. These are succulents, and just like the succulents and cacti, they kind of thrive on neglect. Succulents a little less than cacti do, so I would just use an all-purpose kind of house fertilizer and kind of dilute it by half, and then water it about once a month. A liquid fertilizer at that, and that should help your jade plant. So do not overfeed them. They can get really bushy, and if they've eaten too much or have too much nitrogen in their substrate, they will kind of start to turn yellow and lose a bunch of leaves also. So make sure that you're not overfeeding your plant as well. Well, I guess I can't really think of anything else that I really want to tell you guys with these plants. They're great plants to have, great plants to take care of, and they're beautiful plants. And like I said, if you like the art of bonsai, they're a great tree to have as well. So let me know if you guys have any questions or concern, how it's gone for you with your jade plant. If you have any pictures, post them on here. I'd really like to see them. Other than that, make sure you hit the subscribe button or the bell next to it. That way you'll know anytime I've uploaded a new video. Well guys, have a good one. Take it easy, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.